Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dishing with Stephanie's Dish. I'm Stephanie Hansen. Good morning. I am here with Mathew Batt, and he has written a book called The Last Supper Club, A Waiter's Requiem. And he was published by the Minnesota Historical Press, which is my publisher too. So I was excited to get your book because I feel like we haven't had a good waiter story in a while, and it's high time. So welcome to the program.
Thanks, Stephanie. Great to be here.
Yeah. Can you give people a little bit of your backstory about what it is that you're writing about? You're writing about the restaurant that you worked at that a lot of us will know that closed and kind of your experience there.
Sure. So basically, it started when I was on sabbatical from my university teaching job and discovered after a few months that it turns out a 50% pay cut is actually quite a lot of money. And so I was absolutely broke, needed to pay my son's daycare expenses and, just about everything. So I fell back on the only job that I knew I could get, that I knew I was qualified for and could, get money quick. And that was waiting tables. And that just happened to align at the same time the Surly Brewing Company was opening its not only its destination brewery, but also on the second floor, this fancy high-end restaurant that would end up being called the Brewer's Table. And I got hired there to basically be kind of like I don't know, like a free safety or something, just to work when somebody needed a night off or to otherwise just be there in case there was too many numbers on the books. But pretty soon I ended up just falling in love with the job. I not only worked there as the stopgap measure to fill out the rest of the summer in my sabbatical, but I stayed on and worked through the entire lifespan of the restaurant for another 2.5 years, even after I was back to full pay and teaching again.
It was like reading a book about my friends. I know Jorge, I know Omar, I know people who've worked in the business, and I just felt like it was a warm hug after COVID and all of the really crappy things that have happened in a lot of the lives of our restaurant hospitalitarians, we'll call them.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like your book really captured what was my experience in being in hospitality, the part of it that I loved, some of it that I hated, some of the people you hate, right? There's always at every restaurant you work at, it's like the cast of characters are the same. They just have different names.
Right.
And I really, I enjoyed the book and I felt really sad when the restaurant closed. And I felt sad all over again because the Brewer's Table was such a groundbreaking restaurant and Jorge had such an amazing vision for it and all the folks that worked there. And I was just sad all over again when I got to the end.
I know, spoiler alert, but yeah, it's not open anymore. Yeah, I was too. I couldn't really fathom how crushed I was by the closing of the restaurant. I mean, I guess first of all, I have to say, like, I hadn't worked in restaurants in like 10 years, and I never worked in any in Minnesota before this. Um, so to me, the cast of characters was entirely new. Like, I didn't understand what a big deal Jorge was. Um, I didn't understand how just amazingly talented and knowledgeable and just like beautiful, like everybody I worked with was. It was just the most amazing group of people I'd ever met. I mean, all of whom were, at least 10 years younger than I was at the time. Um, but at the same time, they were like smarter, better at like the kind of agility and just sort of like on your feetness you need to have working in hospitality. And so I immediately felt like outskilled and outpaced by everybody. But before long, it was like we were all family. It was just amazing. So it was really it was crushing when it closed. And it was the kind of thing that I tried to hang on to for a little while by seeking another restaurant that we all momentarily worked at. Um, oh gosh, what was it called? It was where the La Belle Vie was, which is since closed again and become something new. Um, but it just wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same to go from doing the amazing kind of stuff that Jorge was putting out night after night after night at the brewer's table to serving like steak Diane again and shrimp scampi and stuff that
Yep.
just was, nice and expensive for sure. But it wasn't, like mind blowing.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting too because Jorge's going to be opening a new restaurant called Mex-Tex that will be at Urban Eatery on the Lake Calhoun Apartments, I guess is probably the best way people know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious whether that appealed to you as someone who's worked for him, and will that cast of characters reassemble?
Well, I don't know. I want to believe that working in the hospitality industry in like in a given city would be like, Hemingway's Paris or something like that. It's this like movable feast where you can just slide from one salon to the next. But I can safely say that it was not the same, when we tried to replicate it without Jorge, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't the difference. But I just don't know. It's not tempting for me, I have to say, because I'm like 7 years older, and as a 50-year-old person with like feet that hurt from just walking the dogs, I don't think I could cut it anymore. I
That's
really,
kind of a funny thing that you bring up because for my whole life, I always was like, well, I can always fall back on the restaurant business, right? I was a good waitress. I know how to do it. I enjoyed it. I was a terrible hostess. I was
yeah, that's
really
the worst
terrible
job.
at the coat check. Yeah, there's just certain jobs that I was terrible at. But I do remember turning 50 and feeling like, oh God, like I don't think I could probably go back to the restaurant business. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the last two winters, like I even when I was waiting tables, I mean, this was pre-COVID when the Brews table was open, and like I said, I was 7 years younger. Even then, like I was still running and going to the gym, even if I had to put in like a 8 hour, 9 hour, 12 hour shift, and it wasn't the end of the world. Uh, and now it's like, oh, my foot hurts. I don't think I can like walk to the grocery store anymore.
Right.
Never mind, like hustle for 8 hours and pretend like it's nothing wearing,
Yeah.
like clogs and stuff.
Yes, exactly. The Last Supper Club is the name of the book. I can totally see it being optioned for like a series or a movie. Has that crossed your mind?
No. Um, I mean, that'd be
It'd
lovely,
be
right?
amazing. Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I'm just so grateful for the here and now. The press has been amazing. Everybody I work with has just been fantastic. And publishing is so unpredictable that
Brutal.
there's just no telling what can happen. So I'm just super grateful to have another book in the world.
You came at the end of this restaurant experience happened before the end of COVID. And we have had so many folks in the restaurant business. And I think it's fair to say Jorge's been pretty vocal about his personal experience too with mental health, with kind of reevaluating what your place is in the world, um, how we treat hospitality, how we feel about restaurant service. Tipping is still just kind of a mess.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any insights on that? In like, were you surprised that that was where we found ourselves during COVID?
Um, yeah, it was just like one blow after after another to everybody in the restaurant business. Um, but I will say that the way we did things at the brewers table was just sublime, and it was just as simple as we had a tipping pool, right? So like everybody's tips just went into a kitty, and you got paid how much you worked, and it was just like, I don't know. It was a small enough staff where like there were no like freeloaders. Like everybody just worked their butts off for themselves, of course, but for everybody else. Like that's what it felt like. You weren't worried about your own tables because you knew you were going to take care of them. You were worried about other people's tables.
Yeah.
You saw some drinks or beers lined up at the pass. it was like, oh, I got to run those for Jesse. Like I can't just let him sit there and go flat.
Yes.
Um, and it was like because there was a tip pool, we just all did it for each other. And it slowly expanded to include the typically non-tipped staff like hostesses and food runners. And we were on the cusp of expanding that to everybody in the restaurant. And then everything collapsed. And I feel like if we go to like, I don't know, like I remember going to Iceland once, which is a non-gratuity oriented, little island. And the service there was so indifferent. They were just like, they could not be just more savagely bored with whatever your needs were
Right.
as a diner. And I just thought, wow, we're not, we, I mean, it's a hard job. You need motivation to do it well. And I realize people think that's true of everything. But to take your order and just give you food does not require like empathy and enthusiasm. And I think that's where tips come in. Is like if you know you're working for more than just a base wage, you're going to do it to the best of your ability, and you're going to end up making people feel like they're a part of the family.
I
Um,
do feel like too that the restaurant business and being a server is a microcosm for life. Like, how do you show up just in your daily living? How do you manage your daily tasks? How able are you to multitask? What do you do when something goes wrong? How fast can you figure something out on the fly? Like, as someone who was hiring people at one point, I looked for a restaurant experience. I wanted those people.
yeah, for sure.
It's
Um,
really, it requires a lot of different skill sets. And you talk about leadership. I think about Jorge in particular because of the book, but there's a lot of ways in the world that bad managers can exist, right? If you're Target Corporation and you have all these middle layers of some great managers, some probably not so great, right? You can hide in a big corporation. When you're in a restaurant environment, there's no hiding. Like if you're terrible at your job, it's pretty apparent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I give a ton of credit, not only to Jorge, but also to Dustin Thompson, the sous chef. Like, I mean, Jorge and Dustin collaborated on everything, but it was Dustin who like basically led the brigade
Yep.
in the kitchen. But on the floor in the front of house way, Dan DeNovis, our manager for the first, I think, year and a half or something. And then he was promoted to like head of hospitality for all of Surly. Um, that guy was amazing. Like he was such a goofball, but he was also so serious. And unlike a lot of restaurants where I worked, as I'm sure is the case with you, where restaurant managers would just be like in their little hidey hole, recovering from some savage,
Yep.
hangover, and would just like never emerge unless the things were on fire, or maybe especially if things were on fire. Um, Dan was just always, he was willing to do anything. And it was never like you did something wrong if Dan was helping you out. That's just who he was. And it's funny because he went from working at some like one of those bars in Manhattan or someplace that's
Yep.
open till 6 in the morning, where typically he would have to like break up fights by like putting people into sleeper holds and stuff. To doing this like ludicrously like high end management job where he would quiz us, every day almost with like, okay, what's this micro herb? Or like, I'm going to put 7 dots on a plate. You have to tell me, which dot is which and which plate it goes with. Um, and so it was just like we were just always on our toes, and never knew what was coming, but in the best possible way.
Yeah. I love it. So what does your book tour look like and how did your friends feel about being named in the book?
That's a funny thing. The lawyers, right, are they do what they do, and they were worried that if I named people at the sub management level, they were worried that sometimes, I mean, like restaurant folks come and go, and sometimes, kind of like me, like you're not necessarily taking a restaurant job because all the stars aligned and you're doing what you want to do. And so they wanted me to change the names of everybody below the management level. Um, I spent way too much time worrying about that. So um, I hope they recognize themselves, and I hope they don't hate the names I had to change their real identities to. But I can safely say I spent uh, dozens of hours like thinking about that. Um, but anyway, we're doing a little book tour thing, mostly regional stuff. Uh, the kickoff event is at Majors and Quinn, and then we'll be at Next Chapter, and then head down to Northfield to Content, um, and then do some other regional stuff at Boswell Books in Milwaukee, and a couple events in Madison, and then where else? Headed to Salt Lake City for a couple of events, as well as Denver. And then from there, we'll see.
Yeah, I love it. Well, it's been fun to talk to you, Matthew. The book is The Last Supper Club, or Waiter's Requiem. If you listen to me and Stephanie March on the radio at Weekly Dish, you know we spend a lot of time talking about hospitality. And if that feels your cup, then you need to get this book because it's sort of like a walk in those shoes. And it's very well done and it's very interesting. And I just really enjoyed it.
Sweet. Thanks, Stephanie. It was great
Yeah,
talking.
thanks, Matthew. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.